Hello, I'm Eduardo Zamora. I'm Managing Director of Giro Martinez, and we are delighted to have you here in this webinar. Thank you very much. This is the first webinar of a series of webinars which we are going to be hosting in the next few months regarding topics of IP from a Latin American perspective. For the past few months, the offer of webinars is huge. There's plenty of them. We've been all forced to communicate with our clients and colleagues this way. So we wanted to make something specific, something which provides value to our listeners. And I would say, in particular, to what I think it's fair to say, some of the heroes of this crazy pandemic, the inventors, the scientists, the corporations which have been investing a lot of effort and resources in moving forward the means which we have to fight against this crazy virus. And in order to do so, we are extremely honored to have here with us a very experienced panel of professionals coming from, I would say, the most sophisticated or some of the most sophisticated patent offices in Latin America. The Brazilian INPI, the Chilean INAPI, and the Mexican INPI. We're very thrilled to have joining us with us today Ms. Giselle Gomes. Giselle,
hello,
good morning.
everybody. Good morning. I'm Giselle. I'm from Brazil. I'm a biologist. I have a bachelor degree in genetics, a master's and a PhD in molecular and structural biology from the Karla Biophysics Institute, and I've been working with patents since 2004. And since 2015, I've been in the Board of Appeal and Oppositions. So I'm very honored to be here talking about antibody patents. Although I have to highlight that I'm here as a natural person, not as an official representative from the office. It will be good to talk about it. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Giselle, for being here. We also have here with us Carolina Garrido. Carolina, good morning. Let's switch on the micro, Carolina. It's mute. Excellent.
Yeah, hello everyone. Well, my name is Carolina Garrido. I'm a biologist and I have a master's degree in marine bioresources from the University of Maine. I've been working as a patent examiner in biotechnology for more than 20 years, a lot. I work at INAPI, the National Institute of Industrial Property in Chile. And as a patent examiner, I have to deal with antibody-related applications. I think it's a very interesting field, and I'm very happy to talk about it to you now.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you very much. Well, you're also here as a natural person, not representing the INAPI, right? So anything you say, it's a personal opinion based on your experience. And we also have here with us Karla Vázquez. Karla, good morning, afternoon. How are you?
Hi, everyone. Well, my name is Karla Vázquez. I'm partner at Giro Martinez in Mexico. I'm a chemist specialized in pharma and biotech. I have been working on patents since 2008, prosecution and litigation, and I'm currently working on my dissertation to get a master's degree on innovation and technology management at UNAM. Well, in 2013, I was selected by the Japan International Cooperation Agency to be part of intellectual property training course at the Osaka Institute of Technology. And well, I'm really glad to be part of this panel today. I hope I can share with you some nice advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karla. Thank you all for being here. Let me say something before starting the webinar. This is a live event. So things may happen. Our apologies in advance if I know some of our connections doesn't go well, or a kid gets into the room from the back door. Our apologies beforehand for that.
Totally.
We hope things go as smooth as possible, as smoothly as possible. So let me mention a couple of things of, I would say, housekeeping. So what the structure of this webinar is intended to be. So we're going to talk briefly about the context of antibody patenting in the region. Karla Vázquez will throw some numbers and figures just to put everything into context. Then we'll talk about the general rules in each one of the jurisdictions. Each one of us will say what the starting point is to approach this topic. And then we will follow up on that with an exercise which we hope to be very dynamic, which is, commenting on hypothetical claims and analyzing them from the perspective of our own jurisdictions, so that our panelists can, just analyze them and tell us whether they would or would not be accepted in their own jurisdiction, and if not, why. Later on, we'll talk about the key issues in relation to novelty and inventiveness. And after that, we'll do something similar as we did with the claims, which is evaluate some hypothetical scenarios of inventions so that they can be analyzed by our panelists in terms of novelty and inventiveness. At the end, there will be a Q&A section where you can, post our questions. The intention, this has been thought to be something dynamic, kind of a conversation. So please feel free to ask anything you want our panelists to answer. You can do both things. You can either send your questions to this email down here, info@giromartinez.com, or you can post them on YouTube as well. If for any reason, due to time constraints or something, we cannot answer any of your questions today, our apologies for that, but we will certainly follow up after the event. So please make sure to leave your email address if you're posting something and you want us to answer that later on. So let's start with Karla. Let me go back to this presentation. So let's start with Karla, who will make us a brief introduction of what the context of antibody patenting in the region is.
So thank you, Eduardo. Please, next slide. Thank you. There has been a recent shift to biologic-based drugs, including monoclonal antibodies. Well, on the top of the 10 best-selling drugs, we find Humira, which is AbbVie's largest product containing adalimumab. This is a monoclonal antibody prescribed for the treatment of several autoimmune diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease. And Humira is commercialized in markets worldwide: US, Canada, Europe, of course, Latin America, including Brazil, Chile, and of course, Mexico. Next slide, please. So a business strategy of such a blockbuster product will definitely include intellectual property rights, and especially interest, of course, in the patent portfolio. For example, Humira's patent family includes a super worldwide strategy containing 136 simple patents, and this family is valued in $40 million US. So part of the criteria to obtain this value will be related to market-involved technology, quality, who is the assignee, and of course, how strong the patent is, the patent family is, which means process, how strong would it be if it faces a litigation process? And if the product is commercialized, that is commercialized covered by the scope of this patent, for example. Well, this is our context. So let's see how antibody patenting is generally in Brazil. With Giselle.
Thank you, Karla. Well, next slide, please. Brazil treats antibodies as it treats any protein. So we have an article in our law that do not consider natural molecules as inventions. So even if they are isolated from the cell, they cannot be granted under Article 10. So polyclonal antibodies in general will not be considered an invention as a general rule. Even if the molecule is artificial, even if an artificial molecule is claimed, if it is indistinguishable from the natural one, it will also fall under Article 10. Hybridomas, since they are not natural cells, they are patentable, as are the monoclonal antibodies isolated from them. That's an exception in our law. There is a rule specific for that in our biotechnology guidelines. We have actually a section specific for antibodies. These guidelines are under review, and the new version is already available in the INPI website in a Portuguese version. I will not talk about this because we don't know when this new version is going into force, and we don't even know if this new version will go into force or if it will be changed. So I will retain with the current guidelines that we are currently using. Any modification we do, for example, chimera, conjugates, humanization, any genetic engineering you do in the natural molecules, so that makes the molecule patentable as long as if it is distinguishable from the natural ones. Well, we also have under the same Article 10 a prohibition for granting patents or methods of treatment, even if they are used, if they use antibodies. Methods of diagnosis can be granted if they are in vitro in a sample. If they are in the human body or the animal body, such as an injection, it is not considered an invention also. So next slide, please. Well, because of the rigidity of the Article 10, we are very strict with the claim writing. The antibodies must be defined either by its sequence or the number of the deposit of the hybridoma. Characterization by epitopes, incisions, targets, etc. are not acceptable because they are considered either broad or including natural molecules. So we have a few examples, and we'll see more of these when we talk about the claims ahead in the presentation. So next slide, please. Brazil has a peculiarity when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs, that a patent can only be granted if it has a prior concept from Anvisa. Anvisa stands for National Agency for Sanitary Surveillance. It's the Brazilian equivalent for FDA. In the past, as our law did not discriminate what this prior consent was, in the past, Anvisa analyzed patentability criteria, and leading to a double-tier examination. This led to a lot of lawsuits. A concrete case I can mention happened in 2016 when ABV Biotechnology filed a lawsuit against Anvisa for denying prior concept based on patentability issues for exactly Humira, for adalimumab. This led in 2017 for Anvisa and INPI achieve an agreement, and they both signed a joint ordinance. So nowadays, Anvisa cannot deny anymore prior concept based on patentability criteria. It still must give a prior concept, but based only on public health issues. For example, if a drug is prohibited in Brazil because it's risky for human health, for example. It does not mean that Anvisa no longer analyzes patentability. It still does. But Anvisa's opinion is considered as a third-party observation. And also, Anvisa is part of our national health system. And the national health system publishes lists of drugs of interest that must be analyzed in priority. These lists are public in Portuguese also, and can be found in the Brazilian Patent Office website. So let's see now how are the general rules in Chile. Carolina, please.
Okay, thank you, Giselle. Well, in the case of Chile, I want to start pointing out that the general criteria is to analyze antibodies. To analyze antibodies comes from what's written on the industrial property law and the examination guidelines. That's why I mentioned both of those texts here in the slide. In the case of the industrial property law, Article 37 is relevant because it defines subject matter that is excluded from patent protection. Some of these exclusions refer to aspects directly related to biotechnology, the area where the antibodies belong to. And the examination guidelines give some general criteria for the analysis of patent applications. However, they don't say too much about antibodies. In case that you would like to look at those examination guidelines, here at the end of the slide, you can see the link where you can download it. It's in Spanish though. So first, I'm going to show you how the article of the industrial property law relates to antibodies, and then I'll show you what the examination guidelines tell us about. So next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide, please. No, that's the next slide. Okay. So this slide relates to the Article 37 that I just mentioned. So regarding exclusions specified in this article, letters D, E, and F are relevant. Letter D of that article says that methods of surgical or therapeutic treatment of the human or animal body are not considered an invention, or also diagnostic methods applied to the human or animal body are not inventions either. Then the first example of the slide, method of treatment using antibodies cannot be protected as a patent. However, you can use Swiss type claims as it shows in the second dot in the slide. This means that a claim in the form of use of a substance or composition X for the treatment of disease Y cannot be protected because it's a method of treatment. However, a claim in the form of use of a substance or composition for the manufacture of a medicament for the treatment of disease Y, a Swiss type claim, it is allowed. This type of claims relate to medical use, and regarding medical use claims, it must be kept in mind that Article 37, letter E says that the new use must be supported by experimental evidence in the patent application. That's why in the slide I added experimental data next to the Swiss type claims. Now let's go to Article 37F. That article says that it is not considered an invention part of living beings as they are found in nature or natural biological processes. For that reason, natural antibodies per se are not considered an invention and cannot be patented. However, there is a counter exception specified in that same article that says that procedures that use those biological materials found in nature and the products directly obtained by them are susceptible to protection as long as they satisfy the requirements of novelty, inventive step, industrial application, and they are sufficiently described. So a natural antibody obtained from an animal, for example, cannot be patented. However, one that can be obtained by a technical procedure, such as one produced by a host cell transformed with the nucleotide sequences that code for the antibody, can be patented. So now let's go to the examination guidelines. Can we go to next? Thank you. As I told you at the beginning, the examination guidelines don't have a chapter on antibodies, but they do say a little bit about them. One of the things that the examination guidelines says about antibodies is that they are a type of polypeptide, and as such, they should be described by their sequences. However, it is recognized that the 6 complementary determining regions, I'm going to call them CDRs from now on, are the appropriate structural characterization. Also, the possibility of a structural description based on 3 CDRs from the light or heavy chain or less is not the norm, and it could be allowed depending on the state of the art, the experimental evidences of the description, and the technical sufficiency that the invention discloses. Another possibility to protect an antibody is by the hybridoma that produces it. But in that case, it is important to keep in mind that biological material that is necessary for the reproducibility of the invention must be deposited in an international depositary authority. These are institutions for the deposit of biological material for the purposes of patent procedure that are recognized by all countries that are part of the Budapest Treaty. Well, this is a general rule for Chile. Let's go to Karla to hear what she has to say about it.
Thank you, Carolina. Well, first, please be noticed that there are no specific rules related to patentability of antibodies in Mexico. Well, industrial property law and its regulations will provide grounds for patentability criteria, and they are written in a general way. They will apply to biological inventions, so in this case, it will be related to antibodies. Next slide, please. Yes, that's nice. Well, as a TEMEC will be entering in force tomorrow, July the 1st, the Senate will just approve the latest amendments to the new IP law. And the new proposed name for this law is the Federal Law for the Protection of Industrial Property. So this new law will be subject to further study, and we'll see what will be definitely stated there. You will notice along this law that the constant is that to be considered an invention, it must be something. It must not be something from the nature. It must be transformed, and we will see it here. So, next slide, please. Well, in the current law, Article 15 states that all human creations are considered inventions, which exactly allows to transform the matter or the energy that exists in the nature or its uses by humans to satisfy concrete needs. So the purpose of transforming what exists in nature remains in the proposed corresponding article, as you can see. So next slide, please. The definition of patentable invention is written in Article 16 of the current law. To be patentable, you must be, in general terms, as in the other countries, new, result of an inventive step, and susceptible of industrial application. And this criteria will remain in the proposed amendments. Next slide, please. Now, novelty and inventive step are defined on Article 12 of the IP law, but amendments now pretend to state that any substance, compound, or composition included in the state of the art will not be excluded from patentability as long as its use is new. So let's see in the near future what will be finally approved. And Article 12 also defines the inventive step, which is a creative process that is not deduced from the state of the art to a person's skill in the art. And proposed amendments specify that this inventive step is specifically that it's not obvious, just like that. So we will go further and deeper in the presentation. Maybe we can continue with the next slide. So going back to Article 16, there are relevant exclusions for antibodies, as they are biological and generic material found in nature, might be biological and genetic material found in nature. It is intended to be detailed in the proposed amendments that by specifying that the biological material isolated from its natural environment and obtained through a technical procedure might be subject of a patentable invention, even if it already existed previously in nature. So basically, you will need to fulfill patentability criteria as well. So inventive step will be really important to this part. And further amendments also intend to request that industrial application of a total or partial sequence of a nucleic acid or protein should be expressly disclosed in the patent application. So it's not formally part of this patent application, and it will be needed to interpret claims. Next slide, please. This is 19, yes. Article 19 of this IP law excludes surgical, therapeutic, or diagnostic treatment methods. And nevertheless, in this moment, Swiss type claims might be well accepted, as well as EPC 2000 formats. That's the way you can claim a therapeutic effect related to an antibody. But in the proposed amendments, they're willing to keep this provision, but we will certainly do not know how they work, how the drafting will work in the near future. So we will see what will be considered acceptable as well. Next slide, please. In addition, Article 19 of the IP law is related to antibody, since it excludes discoveries, disclosing something that already existed in nature, even though it was previously known to man. Other exclusions are related to juxtaposition of inventions, unless those are not obvious to a person skilled in the art. And proposed amendments would affect exclusions because they will include as inventions alterations of the use, form, dimensions, or materials thereof. And they are intended to be acceptable as long as they are not obvious to persons skilled in the art. Relevant exclusions to antibodies, including in the proposed amendments, are the biological and genetic materials found in nature. So here they're forming formal part of these exclusions. And well, those were the general rules related to antibody patenting in Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. And we go back to Eduardo.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. So now we know what the starting point is, and I suggest now doing something which I hope listeners will find is interesting, which is I'm going to throw some claims here at the bottom, hypothetical examples of how antibodies may be claimed, so that you can please analyze them and give us your opinion about whether they would or would not be acceptable in your own jurisdictions, please. So let's start with example number 1, which is this one. Antibodies characterized by the fact that they are specific for protein X.
Well, in general, as a general rule in Brazil, what is protected by the claim must be characterized by what it is. So in this case, this claim is not characterizing the antibody, but the ligand, the object of the antibody, and this cannot be accepted. This way of writing is considered not clear, not precise, and very broad. So we would not grant this under Article 25, and also we would consider this contains natural molecules. So we would combine Article 25 and Article 10. That's the general rule.
Yeah, well, in the case of Chile, this could only be protected if the protein X satisfies the requirements for patenting. This is not common because most of the antibodies that are currently disclosing patent applications bind to antigens that are already known. So it could be, it is very unusual, but that would be the only case where I can think it could be protected. And now, Mexico?
Well, for Mexico, I think it would be difficult. Exactly the same reasons as Carolina said for Chile. It's because it might be objected because of lacking of clarity, and you have other tools, other ways to characterize your antibodies. So possibly it will be facing some clarity objections.
Yeah, I would like to complement in the last one. This would also be considered a reach-through claim, protecting antibodies yet to be discovered. So the invention of an anti-gene do not grant the protection for the antibody. So that would also be something to say as an objection. Sorry.
Excellent, thank you. So let's go with the second one, which is the following. An isolated monoclonal antibody comprising an amino acid sequence, which is at least 90% homologous to the amino acid sequence of sequence ID number 1.
Yeah. Well, to characterize the antibody by its sequence is the perfect way of characterizing it, but we don't accept the word homologous because we see it as having evolutionary causes. But in Brazil, as a matter of fact, we also do not consider percentage of identity. We find it not precise, and also including natural molecules. So we would ask you to remove the percentage, and we would grant only the sequence, as long as it is not natural and it's different from natural one. So that's the case here in Brazil.
Yeah, in Chile, it's similar in the case of the term homologous, because it's a term related to shared ancestry. So sequences are considered homologous or not if they either share ancestry or not, but they are not percentages. So if we translate this to identity, that would be the right term, or similarity. Now, regarding the percentage of identity, examiners consider that a slight modification of the CDRs can affect the binding abilities of an antibody. And because of that, a claim describing an antibody by the sequence similarity or identity is not allowed unless you don't touch the CDR. So in this case, it could be allowed only if the percentage of identity does not apply to the CDRs.
Well, for Mexico, for example, it could really be close as the Chile criteria, because, well, homologous, how much? If you're saying 90%, it's almost that could be foreseen before. So maybe it will not. It will be objected by lacking inventive step. So as long as you are considering that this homologous percentage is not regarding the CDR, well, it will be very, very difficult, I think.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's go with the third example. There you go. Monoclonal antibody against protein X, characterized by the fact that it is produced by the hybridome HHH, deposited on the number YYY.
That's the perfect way of claiming a monoclonal antibody by the deposit. Brazil is yet not a party in the Budapest Treaty, but we accept deposits in any of the depository centers from the Budapest Treaty. But it's a rare way of claiming, though, but it's a perfect one.
Yeah, in the case of Chile, it's not a problem, that kind of claim. But also the hybridoma must be deposited in an international depository authority for the invention to be reproducible. Mexico.
Well, in Mexico, thank you, Carolina. Well, in Mexico, it will be pretty the same. As long as you have the deposit certificate, it will be okay and well accepted in general terms, I think.
Okay, good. And that one was easy then. Let's move to another one. It's a humanized antibody, right? It's a bit long.
Humanized, yeah. As long as you consistence of SEC ID, that's perfect. You pardon me because I have to read. It's in small letters. Well, as long as you have the 6 CDR sequences and the molecule is not natural or identical to a natural one, we can grant. This is actually one of the examples in our guidelines to be.
Yeah, in case of Chile, this also will be accepted as a right way to draft a claim for antibodies, because the structure, I mean, the sequences of the CDRs or the heavy or light chains are disclosed there. So it would be a right way to draft a claim.
Well, in Mexico, this is an excellent option because you're giving the exact sequence of the CDRs, and I see no problem with this kind of claim.
Excellent, thank you. So the last one, which is this one, an isolated monoclonal antibody wherein bound to antigen 1 blocks the binding of antigen 1 to ligand X.
Well, in Brazil, as a general rule, we cannot characterize a product by the result we expect the product to have. So this would be considered imprecise, and we would not grant it under Article 25.
Yeah, in Chile it would be similar. I mean, that function is considered an expected result. What I mean is that what antibody does depend on its structure. Then for clarity reasons, the characterization must disclose the structure, the sequence of the antibody that allows that result to be achieved. So it could have clarity issues, that claim.
Well, from the Mexican perspective, I think that this example is not clear because I don't know if the blocking effect was expected, for example. So to avoid being rejected, I would prefer to characterize the antibody by a structural characteristic and emphasized in the specification if there's an unexpected result, for example. Maybe something is different. The antibody was modified to increase binding or something.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think it was a good way of getting deep into the into the issue by doing something practical. Due to time constraints, we had to limit it to 5 examples. I'm sure there may be many more. To the viewers, just let me remind that if you want to ask questions about it, you can do so. If they may be answered or not, our panelists are free to just say that they cannot comment on that, but just to make it more dynamic if they want to. So what I suggest now is going to review the key issues regarding novelty and inventive step. Again, similar to what we did before. What's the starting point in relation to these 2 specific requirements is. So let me go to do it like this, go back to this format. And Giselle, if you don't mind starting, please.
Yeah, let's begin with novelty. Usually when you have the hybridoma deposit or the sequence available in the prior art, you have a novelty breaking. But I want to bring here some cases I've seen before. Sometimes we find prior art with experimental data on the antibodies with the name of the antibody, so we know the antibody is the same. And we do not have a specific rule for that in our guidelines, but there are examiners that think that these prior art are novelty breaking. I've received in the Board of Appeal a few cases of these, and I have reversed this, stating that there is a general rule that a prior art, in order to be considered a proper prior art, must enable the person skilled in the art to reproduce the technology. And in my opinion, without the hybridoma or without the sequence, we cannot reproduce the antibody, even though we know it's the same antibody. Actually, these prior arts are usually congress or symposiums resumes made by the inventors themselves. So as an advice, I leave here an advice to not share the antibody, not publish anything before the a patent application. It's obvious to say that, we always say that, but we keep finding these prior arts. So next slide, please. Well, as a general rule, when we get to the step of analyzing the inventiveness, we are usually with a more specific claim, because broader claims are opposed in a step before, because we have very rigid rules, including Article 25 and Article 10. So generally, when we get here, we are already with a very specific antibody to analyze. Generally, a novel monoclonal antibody against a known target will be rejected because it will be considered obvious. The key issue here is the comparative data. I always advise inventors to bring as much data as you can in the application. You can bring comparative data later during the examination, but we have an article 32 in our law to prevent the adding of matter So the comparative data you bring later must be deductible from the data you brought before. So I know it's a paradox. It's difficult to decide when is the best day to apply. Wait a little bit more to have more experimental data at the risk of losing novelty, or applying or filing today at the risk of not having enough comparative data. I know that, and I'm here bringing the importance of the comparative data. Also, I would like to bring something interesting. Brazil is a medium-sized office. We have, I think, around 800 patent examiners or 600. It's not that big. We don't have a separate department for analyzing antibodies. What we do have are molecular biologists like me with a PhD in general molecular biology, not specific for antibodies. And we also highlight that the patent examiner will never be as a specialist in the field as the inventor. So when you bring comparative data, please explain to us what is important, teach us what we have to pay attention, because we'll probably the day before we might have analyzed a genetically modified corn or a genetically modified microorganism for fermentation, because we are generalists. We deal with a lot of different technology in biotechnology itself, but with a lot of different use. So I've brought here a few examples of patent applications and how they had overcome the inventive steps. So if you would be able to bring us the jump, because next slide, please. Brazil considers a person skilled in the art in a very broad way. So for us, this juridical fiction might be a person or a group of people in the case of technologies like biotechnology, nanotechnology, and etc. And these people may make logical connections and reasonable assumptions. So we do not need that the prior art explicitly motivates the person skilled in the art to change and reach the invention. We think that the person skilled in the art can think. So there must be a jump. This jump may be a small jump, but from the prior art to the invention, in order for us to assess an inventive step, there must be a jump. So I always advise inventors to specify, my jump is this one. This thing here was not available in the prior art. That's also something I like to highlight. So let's see how Chile views these things.
Okay. Well, regarding novelty, here in Chile, there are no specific rules for assessing novelty or inventive step of antibodies. As with an invention, the content of the claims is going to be compared with the state of the art. If the antibody described in the claim is found in the prior art, then it does not meet the novelty requirement. I was thinking about what Giselle said about an antibody that was disclosed in the prior art, but just not by their sequence, but the name, for example. And in our case, the disclosure now of the sequence would be considered novel, but to overcome a lack of inventive step would be almost impossible in that case. So I was saying that in our case, we do the exam exactly as with any invention, because it is the content of the claims what is going to be compared with the state of the art. The drafting of the claims and specifically the scope of them is extremely important, because if a claim is too broad, it is easier to find a document that affects its novelty. Yeah. Next slide, please. So when assessing inventive step, the examiner has to determine which is the technical problem that the inventor plans to solve and what is the solution, what is the invention. Sometimes the analysis shows that the antibody solves a technical problem not solved by similar antibodies, or it has some unexpected properties, as I wrote in the first 2 points in the slide. which makes the analysis easier. However, it must be kept in mind that the analysis is done on the claims. Sometimes they are so broadly drafted and the application does not have data to support such a scope of the claims. And it can be argued that the application does not show that it can solve the technical problem over the whole scope of the claim. And in that case, it could be rejected by lack of inventive step. So the most important issue is the data or comparative data, especially in this area where there's so much literature about it. If the application shows with data that the antibody has some technical features not obvious from the state of the art, then it is easier to determine an inventive step. In the next slide, I'm going to show you some examples of characteristics that help to determine that an antibody meets the requirements of inventive step. Can you show me the next slide, please? There. These are some examples of different characteristics that could be useful to determine that an antibody has an inventive step. For example, the application shows that the antibody has improved biological activity, or there's an improvement in affinity, or there's a reduced treatment-related toxicity or reduced immunogenicity, or even improvement in half-life in an antibody that it's used in therapeutic treatment, or a new medical use. About this last one, medical use, as a reminder, Article 37E says that the new use must be supported by experimental evidence, and that experimental evidence must be presented in the original application. It cannot be added later. Well, this is all I have to say about this topic, but now, so let's go to Mexico. Karla.
Hi, thank you. Well, thank you, Carolina. Article 47 states that information must be included in the specification, and it must be clear and complete, and include the best mode known by the applicant. This is super important to be supportive to the novelty and inventive step characteristics. In general terms, proposed amendments also request these characteristics in the specification. And next slide, please. So further, Article 47 requests the certificate of deposit, which is related to our cases in biological materials. And if the case is that they cannot be described otherwise. The proposed amendments request also includes this certificate as well. Maybe an important difference in the latest proposed amendments is that claims are requested to be defined by it, defined on its essential technical characteristics, which is very explicit. You should include these essential technical characteristics in your claim. Next slide, please. In addition, the proposed amendments would formally state that the sequence listed is considered a general part of the description. Next slide. Well, finally, Article 28 of the current law's regulation shows that the drafting rules of the specification. So what is requested to specify the invention as claim? If you're gonna claim an antibody by binding affinity, then you must include a specific method of measuring maybe the dissociation constant for the sake of clarity. And you should also include any advantages effect with prior art. And if there's a difference with a closed product disclosure, please emphasize this in the specification as well. And if you need to obtain your monoclonal antibody from a specific cell, be sure to have a deposit certificate in a recognized depository institution. And well, those would be the Mexican key issues, Eduardo. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's remain with this layout, because what we suggest doing now is to review some potential hypothetical scenarios. And again, as we did with the claims, let's see how each of your jurisdictions would approach them.
Okay.
So let's go with the first one. It will be this one, case number 1. A new protein displaying a higher to unknown immunogenicity is discovered and described for the first time.
Okay, perfect. Well, here in Brazil, we have the biotechnology guidelines with a specific section for antibodies, but its main focus is on drafting of the claims, Article 25 and Article 10, being or not being an invention. It doesn't talk about novelty or inventiveness. So it is up to the general rule. And as a general rule, this is a perfect way of separating the broad claims from the specific ones. The problem here is that probably if the antigen is new and its immunogenicity is not obvious, the antibody would be novel and inventive. The problem here would be if it is claimed in a specific way, because we cannot grant a broad claim. So it's a case of claim drafting more than inventiveness, which in my opinion is a step more difficult to overcome than inventiveness in our jurisdiction.
Yeah. In Chile, this is a case that I mentioned before, that if the antigen is novel and has inventive step, then the antibody against it is also novel and inventive. So this is the case. The antigen is not known and it has some unexpected properties, so it could be accepted.
In the case of Mexico, it would be pretty much the same. If your antigen is novel and not obvious, of course, then your antibody might also be novel and inventive. So just need to support, again, a lot of support in the specification.
Excellent. Thank you. Case 2. Receptor PD-1 was known and its immunogenicity was obviously predictable.
Well, we would probably not grant this one, but again, it would depend on comparative data. So, but in a general view, this would not be accepted.
Yeah, in Chile, it would be similar. It depends on the particular properties of the antibody. If it just binds to the antigen and it does not have additional properties, it could be considered not inventive, because the antigen is known and methods to produce antibodies from known antigens are part of the state of the art. So it could be like a simple thing to do, not inventive.
Yeah, well, same in Mexico. It is because the immunogenicity was considered obvious in this example. So it will not fulfill patentability criteria with respect to inventive step. That's it.
Excellent, thank you. So case 3. Receptor PD-1 was known. This was generic anti-PD-1 antibody.
Yeah. The way I see it, it seems to me like a selection invention. Well, selection inventions are accepted in Brazil, but we really need comparative data, and the properties must be really exceptional. So it's possible, and we do accept selection inventions, but it's highly dependable on the data.
Yeah, in Chile, it's similar as in the previous case. It depends on the particular properties of the antibody. And just as I said, to generate new antibodies that bind to a known antigen is a common practice for an expert in the field. So there's no inventive step in that process, unless the application shows that that particular antibody has a technical feature that is not obvious.
Well, in Mexico, a second antibody, I think if it has an advantageous effect, shows an advantageous effect in comparison with the generic form. I don't know, maybe something like Fc-associated immune functions with respect to the half-life or something that makes it better with respect to the state of the art.
Very good, thank you. So case example number 4. Here we go. Receptor PD-1 was known. The generic antibody was known. For example,
so the antibody was.
Sorry, Giselle.
Yeah. So So the antibody was already known and used as a diagnostic agent in vitro. Well, second uses are granted in Brazil. We don't have a specific guideline for those in the biotechnology guidelines. We do have in the chemical guidelines that we can use by analogy. So if the function is different and for a different disease, and maybe we can see inventiveness over there, but it will be difficult, but it's possible. The disease must be different, and the disease must not be deductible. So there are a few lists when we are dealing with second therapeutical use, but it's possible. But the grant of the use do not mean the antibody will be granted as a product. So for the antibody, no.
Yeah, in the cases of Chile, it's very similar to what Giselle said in Brazil. The antibody would not be granted for its use, but the medical use can be granted as Swiss type claim. And in this case, the application must have experimental data supporting the medical use. It cannot be speculative.
Well, in the case of Mexico, I kind of agree with all the previously mentioned criteria. What I think that would happen is that it will be difficult to you need a lot of support to now diagnose another condition or disease. Very difficult, but a lot of support I think you will need, definitely, including, of course, in vivo experimental data as well. I definitely suggest.
Yes,
Excellent. So case number 5, the PDA receptor and generic polyclonal antibody to the receptor were both known.
If the antibody is monoclonal, it will not be considered as patentable because producing monoclonal antibodies, techniques for producing monoclonal antibodies are already known in the art. So the mere case of producing a monoclonal antibody where the polyclonal antibody exists is considered obvious. But if you bring comparative data, again, proving that there are novel properties, unsuspected, surprise ones, so it may be seen as having an inventive step.
Mm-hmm. In Chile, it would be similar. It depends on the particular properties of the antibody. It must have some technical features that are not obvious from the previous art. And if it's already known in an antibody that binds to the same receptor, it would have to have some comparative data to show that there's something different that is not obvious.
It would be the same situation in Mexico. You need to show that you have an advantageous effect with respect to the prior art and support it. Experimental data will be required.
Okay, case number 6, and I think it's the last one, or there's another one. Anyway, case number 6, the receptor PD-1 was known, and then anti-PD-1 monoclonal antibody was also known.
That's the same as before, the importance of comparative data. I can never highlight enough how the comparative data are important in the assessment of inventive step. Do you believe that we still receive patent applications without examples, without any data, without any experimental data? We do still receive those, and they are not obligatory, but they are so important for the assessment of inventiveness. Without them, sometimes we say it's obvious, but actually we can't be sure. And the how can I say, the burden of proof is in the applicant. So it's the applicant's burden of proof to prove that it is inventive. So bring data.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing that Giselle in Chile. Also, it would be it would depend on the particular properties of the antibodies. So the comparative data in this case is important. As I said before, there's so much literature about antibodies, and usually the antibodies that are presented in the applications bind to already known antigens. So there's so many other antigens to compare to that if you don't do it in the application and you don't show that there's a difference in your antibody related to the others already known, it is hard to say that there's an inventive step on those.
Well, from my point of view, it's very important, this we're saying, like, you will find a lot of literature, a lot of papers, research papers, and they're always new ones just coming. And so you need to prepare your experimental data, because you will be questioned about your effect here, like why isn't it expected to be like that? And that's support again.
Okay, we're surely taking something out of here. Data, experimental data, and
Yes.
support. You know,
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. So last case, PD-1 receptor was known, and the generic anti-PD-1 was monoclonal antibody was also known.
So we already have a pool of genetic monoclonal antibodies. We can select one of those, and we can see an inventive step in this selection one is this new one. But as this is an exception to novelty, the results, technical results must be exceptional also. So again, comparative data.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing as Giselle. So it depends on the specific properties of the antibody, that it shows that it really has some particular features that are not obvious from the prior art.
Yeah.
Well, the beauty of this example, it is exactly that: support, please show experimental support as much as possible for a very strong claim draft.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. That's the lesson that we're taking from this today. But let me ask you something, because in my experience, we've encountered this problem many times. The objecting the lack of data supporting what we think is inventive. What about things that in jurisdictions like Spain or Europe is taken into account, which is considered as a secondary indicia of inventiveness, such as the commercial success, or the amount of papers that are being published mentioning this, or things like these ones? Would that be considered, and is it possible to bring them into the prosecution after having filed a patent?
Yes, in our general guidelines, we have a specific case for assessing inventiveness, including these ones. So commercial success is an indicative of inventive step. If the prior art teaches that the way to go is the left, and the invention goes to the right against the prior art teaching, this is also an indicative of inventive step. There are lists of these exceptions, so we can. Commercial success is one of them.
Yeah, in the case of Chile, I don't think that there's anything written about commercial success as a sign of inventive step, although you can incorporate new experimental data to show, or to add some data later during your application to show that there's something that maybe it was not completely supported, but was already said in the application. What I mean is that You can bring new information, new data to support something for your inventive step, but it must be something that was already set in the application, or it can be deduced from the application. It cannot be new.
Well, in Mexico, commercial success, I do not think that will work for support of inventiveness. Although you need to support or say something, if you have something to say in the specification and related to this commercial success, just say it. Of course, during prosecution, the examiner will be, if the examiner objects inventive step, you can provide further experimental information as long as it is not included in the specification per se. So you can just show, like, you are throwing me a question and I'm sending you this information which exactly responds to your precise question, but there must be a important link in a wording saying supported in the specification, the initial one. So you cannot add, but you can kind of extend your explanation with experimental data during prosecution.
Let me just complement that commercial success is an indicative of inventiveness, but it's not a proof. So we can consider this if we are in doubt, if it's difficult, but it's not a proof. It's an indicative.
Yeah, I want to say something. As Karla said, in Mexico, in Chile also, if you are adding new information, new data, you cannot put it in the description. It's going to be like an annex, just to show some information that supports something already said in the original description.
Excellent, thank you. So the last one, case number 8.
Oh, we are going from the simple ones to the more complex one. Yeah, that's something interesting when I when I'm assessing inventiveness. Usually, it's my experience that when it's difficult to assess inventiveness, I always look to the claim writing, to the words used, because usually when the applicant is creative in the writing of the claim, when the way of writing the claim is too different, it's usually because it's not novel or it's not inventive. So when something is obvious, it's easy to explain. It's easy to see. It's so obvious that it's sometimes difficult to write the obviousness, to explain the obviousness. So in this case, the receptor is known and the antibody is known. Probably you won't get it. Again, it will be a case of data, but it will be very difficult because we are getting to more complex ones.
Yeah, in the case of Chile, it could also depend on the particular properties of this second antibody, how different it is from the prior art and what the different does in the way it works, for example. So as we said before, comparative data is absolutely relevant in this case.
Yeah.
Well, I have the same impression for Mexico. If you have something different and inventive, you will need support for this.
Okay, so we're going to change the title of this webinar to The Importance of Experimental.
Totally.
Examiners think like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that was it. We were aiming at making it last an hour. It's been 1 hour and 8 minutes, according to the live timer that we have here that YouTube kindly offers us. So we nailed it quite a lot. Thank you very much for that. We said that there was going to be some room for Q&A, questions and answers. So let's go, because I think we have a few that have been posted here, right? So the first one, it's in Spanish. We all understand it, but let me translate it for the listeners who are English speakers. So Eduardo from Costa Rica says, usually the patent examiners in Costa Rica consider the terms at least or approximately as terms lacking clarity. What would be your experience in your own jurisdictions?
Well, in Brazil, at least, pelo menos in Portuguese, would not be considered as a lack of clarity. We accept, but approximately we don't. Substantially, we don't. There is a list in our guidelines with terms we do not consider that are precise enough. But at least we consider.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in Chile, we would be considered lack of clarity. We don't accept terms like approximately, and I don't remember the other, but you have to define, if there's a range, it has to be clearly defined.
Well, in Mexico, in the first place, if you write your claim with these terms, they are likely to be objected by lack of clarity, for lacking clarity. But in my experience, if these terms are well supported and defined in terms of maybe a percentage or a range within the specification, it is likely that you will overcome this objection.
Thank you. There's a couple more. Here you go. May I claim the antibody on functional features that do not limit it to any structure?
Well, we are receiving a lot of applications with claims like that. Actually, we have in our general guideline a
Okay. Giselle is having some sort of problem. Perhaps, okay. Carolina, you can...
Yeah, in
Are you
Chile...
listening to me?
Yeah, you're back. Sorry, we lost you for a minute.
Oh, she's back. Okay.
I'm sorry.
So, yeah,
continue. To claim a product by its functions is not acceptable in general, except if the product cannot be characterized by itself. Since the antibody can be characterized by itself, by its structure, by its hybridoma, etc., we do not consider the claiming of the antibody by its function as patentable. But there is not a specific guideline for this. So each examiner, it's one different head. So, but generally that's how we see it. I'm sorry for the connection.
No problem.
Yeah, in Chile, it would have problems with clarity. I mean, it would have to have a structural feature to characterize it, unless I'm only thinking that it could be the case where I told you that it's very rare, because usually it doesn't happen now, that the antigen is not known and it meets the requirements for patenting. In that case, maybe you could say that the antibody that binds that antigen could be protected, but this is very unusual. It would be very rare now.
Well, for Mexico, I think it would be very difficult. Really, it will be really possible to have an objection related to clarity, and I would recommend prefer to include the structural characteristics within the main claim, but still, you will need a lot of support if you try the other case.
Excellent. So there's another one here, which is the following. Is there a way to protect natural antibodies?
If the natural antibody is in a composition together with other components that are not natural, they form a new product that cannot be found in nature, then we can. Mm-hmm. But the antibody per se, natural one, no.
Yeah. In the case of Chile, as I told before, natural antibodies per se cannot be protected because there's an exclusion in the law that does not allow the protection of natural, not just antibodies, but any biological thing that you can find in nature. But there's a contraception in the law that things that are produced in technical ways could be protected. So if the antibody is sequenced and then the sequence is used to transfect a host cell that produces the antibody, then it could be protected.
Well, for Mexico, well, natural occurring antibodies per se will not be patentable. But I'm also thinking about something similar to Chile. Maybe if you can describe this antibody in terms of how it was produced, because there was such a technical problem to be solved. Like I remember a recent a webinar I just assisted, and there was an explanation about a coronavirus vaccine, and they were saying that that vaccine was related to choose an antigen of the coronavirus, and the main important part is that whenever they take this the main epitope inside of a virus capsid to be inserted in the vaccine, sometimes this epitope just denaturalized. And if you can find a way or the correct epitope to produce a vaccine that will have these antibodies, but all those complications, the technical thing that you need to overcome, that might be a way to protect a kind of a natural antibody, because you were not able to produce that otherwise.
Yeah, I was thinking here, if you conjugate the natural antibody to another natural molecule, and the new molecule is not natural, so you have a fusion protein or a conjugate, you can also protect the natural antibody like that.
Excellent, very good. So the last one which we have here right now is this one. Other institutions recognize the deposit of microorganisms for patent purposes in Latin America?
We were building here in Brazil a national institute, but we did not. It's not ready yet. And we are still not a party in the Budapest Treaty. So as long as we do not have our own deposit, we accept the deposit in any of the institutions accredited by the Budapest Treaty. We don't have any here in Brazil.
In Chile, there's one international depository authority. It's called Colección Chilena de Recursos Genéticos Microbianos. I know that there's another one in Mexico. I don't know if Karla maybe wants to mention that, or do I mention it?
If you have the exact name, I will appreciate if you just read it out loud, please, Carolina.
It's called, I have it here. It says Colección de Microorganismos del CNRG. But there's, if you look for international depository authorities, there's a site in WIPO that lists all the these institutions, and it says what kind of biological material they can deposit, because not all of them deposit everything. They have a special station.
Excellent, thank you. So they're telling me that there's another one. There you go. I'm feeling like an anchorman here. Really? Okay, there's another one. So let me translate it. If the description shows several antibodies which differ in one or two amino acids from the CDR, can you claim all of them in one single independent claim, for instance, using a percentage of identity?
In Brazil, we don't accept percentage of identity. Never. As the guidelines we are currently using, that's very strict. We don't accept percentage of identity. And if you have more than one antibody, we may find that you lack unity of invention also.
Mm-hmm.
And we may ask you to divide the application, depends on the concrete case. But percentage of identity, it can be accepted.
Yeah. In Chile, we do not accept percentage of identity of the CDRs. But I was thinking in this case, if the claim specify the sequence of those CDRs, I mean, what's the difference in that amino acids? For example, if it could be two different CDRs, CDR1 for the light chain, for example. If those are specified, maybe that could be accepted, but if it's by percentage of identity, it would not.
Well, in Mexico, the percentage of identity is different in the CDR regions. Well, I think that might be patentable, but you need a lot of support again, and you will need to use the sequence in the claim. And what else? It is also possible that there might be more than one invention, which you need to evaluate first. And evaluate this first because you need a solid description. If you are gonna divide this application, you will need support for both. So think a lot about how would you draft your specification? How would you plan your experiments as well?
Yeah, I want to say something about it because I also think that it could be very possible that it could be objected by Unity. So it has to be very well thought if it's really one invention or you have more than one. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I think that's it. We're not gonna ask anything else because it's already 1 hour 20.
Oh,
but we did pretty
well. We
well.
were having fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, now every time I have an argument with I was gonna say a parent or a friend of mine, what am I gonna bring? A lot of experimental data and because this
we
is
love those.
what I'm clearly taking from this today.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, jokes apart, thank you very much. Sincerely, I mean, honestly, I think it's been a great exercise, which is not common to find 3 experts talking about something so specific coming from our Spanish and Portuguese speaking jurisdictions. So I think it's great. Hope everybody has enjoyed it. And I want to mention as well that you've all been very brave to show up here on a live event, not really knowing who's on the other side, right? And what questions are they going to be asking? But I think it's been great, fresh and dynamic, talking about something very, very technical. Of course, this is what you are experienced in. But I think it's been awesome. So thank you very much. It's an honor to have you here, and thank you to the listeners as well for joining us. Stay well.
I thank you the opportunity. Bye.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was nice talking to everybody.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you. See you soon.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.